Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of April 23rd. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles that analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and sudden increase in movement in the market. And the trending list is one that is curated by Matt Tuck. But before I get into it, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel, do one of those things, I would appreciate it. Of course, I will put a link in the description if you guys want to do your own reading. And coming in here at the number 5 spot is a classic book, a classic cover coming out of the Copper Age. Of course, we're talking about Wolverine number 8, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 96 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1989, written by Chris Claremont, and has that classic John Buscema cover that would feature the side-by-side twins homage of Wolverine and Mr. Fix-It. Now, while I don't think that there's a specific reason as to why this book has been hot over the course of this last week, I do think that this is just a book that a lot of comic book collectors want to have in their collection. I mean, it's a classic cover. I mean, who didn't grow up collecting this particular Wolverine ongoing run? And of all of the keys in this particular run, outside of maybe Wolverine number 1, I feel like Wolverine 8 is probably the most valuable, the one that is most desired in the market, simply due to the fact that it has that incredible John Buscema cover. I feel like there's no LCS that wouldn't take this book and put it on the wall as a key issue. And for that reason, a lot of people want to add it to their collection. And what's really impressive about a book like this is because it isn't really specifically related to any, speculation or any, MCU property that has come out over the course of this last, couple years or so. This book has surprisingly been able to hold its floor value, even though we've had a lot of correction in the market. But let's kind of jump into the numbers and I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here. Now, Universal copies have 3,459 on the census. There actually is one 9.9, hasn't been a sale since 2017. 9.8s have 1,010. So, the 9.8s do have a pretty significant amount. Fair market value is 350, 30-day moving 352. And while there has been maybe a slight pullback, you can see that the floor value has held up pretty well overall. I mean, granted, peak price is around 450. Now we're talking about, 350, 360, but this is still a lot higher than what it was going for in 2020 when it was selling around the $200 price point. Now that can be a little bit concerning. Perhaps we are still, due for a correction of this book, but it does really feel like this is a book that looks really good on a shelf, especially at that 9.8 grade. And that's one of the reasons why, you're not really going to see that correction, because there's always going to be a collector who wants this book out there in the market. And then of course, 1988 book, you're not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you could see them being sold around that $25 to $40 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is a personal favorite of mine, one that I feel like hasn't really been getting its due, even though, we're kind of on the heels of why this book is significant. But of course, the book I'm talking about is Thor 134, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 93rd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1966, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby, that would feature the first appearance of the villain character, the High Evolutionary. Now, as I'm sure you guys are aware, we are about to get the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 movie, and I think that it is not a spoiler to say that the High Evolutionary is going to be the villain of that film. And this book right here is an interesting one, because while it has been hot, over the course of the last couple years, in anticipation of this film, where the book is right now feels like a really good time to buy this thing. I mean, the values for this have corrected so hard, even more so than that of a lot of other keys that have had a pullback here in 2023. But this one is an interesting case because we had rumors of the High Evolutionary all the way back in 2018. And this is a book that really shot up, had a major speculation boom back, in that year when we got the initial rumors. And so it's really difficult to evaluate where this book's true fair value should actually be in the market. I mean, where the prices are selling for today is actually really affordable. I mean, of course, depending on your budget, but when you compare it to other villains of the ilk of High Evolutionary, it doesn't seem that bad overall. I actually really do think that the High Evolutionary is going to be a surprise in the Guardians movie. And who knows, maybe we'll get more High Evolutionary storylines in the future, because the High Evolutionary has a lot of ties to Galactus, which it does feel like the MCU is setting up Galactus to make his appearance in the Fantastic Four film. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. CGC Census has it at 1,593 Universal copies. Not too many overall, although, there's a lot of raw books out there. So, this is typically a book that wasn't slabbed too often. 9/8 have 7 on the census, hasn't been a sale in a while. 9/6 17 also hasn't been a sale in a while. Let's take a look here at the 9/2s because there has been some recent comps. 9/2s have 55 on the census. Fair market value is 1,500. 30-day moving is 1,638. And you can see that this is a book that has had, a really strange journey in its life cycle. I mean, for a long time, it was very, very flat. All the way back in 2003, through upwards of 2015, it was a $100, $200 book. Then we had this massive rumor in 2018. And you can see that overnight, it went from 270 all the way up to 1,500. And that's in 2019. So, this is a book that effectively 10x'd all the way back in 2018. Then it's had its pullbacks, had its correction, sold recently for 1,500, another one for 1,700, another one for 1,000. So, it's really hard to determine what the fair market value for this book really should be. I mean, 9.2 is definitely a very high grade, tough book to get at that level, especially since it was a book that came out in 1966. 9.0s have a similar journey where, we see they shoot up all the way back in 2018, had a massive spike in 2022, and then kind of a pullback to the correction of where it's selling for today, which is still in line to, some of the prices that it was commanding all the way back in 2019. So again, kind of like I was saying at the beginning of the segment, it does feel like this is a decent entry point into this book, especially when you go down here, 7.0s, 30-day moving is around the $200 range, which is effectively almost the same as a 4.5, which is selling at, a little bit lower at 133, but the 1 year for the 4.5 was 176. So, you can get a 7.0 almost around the same price as, a 4.0, which is of course a lot of that price compression that I had talked about in some of my predictions for 2023. But I would say that that $200 range is fairly accurate overall. I mean, when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they're going to set you back around that $100 to $200 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is a book that probably could always be on the hot list if we really wanted it to be. But of course, the book we're talking about is one of the Wolverine limited series books. These books are always hot, but this one specifically is Wolverine limited series number 4, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 82nd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1982, written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Frank Miller. That would be the 4th issue of the famous limited series run of the Wolverine. Now, like I discussed in the setup, these books are always very popular. They're always selling out there in the market. And I feel like, every one of these is always going to get its moment in the sun, whether it's issue number 2, 3, or 4. I mean, of course, issue number 1 is a book that everyone wants in their collection, but this is a collector's trap. I mean, once you get issue number 1, you kind of feel the need to complete the series because, hey, it's only 4 books. Why not just get the other 3? And so that's one of the reasons why you'll always see these books on the trending list, is because this is just a set and we are all comic book collectors and we have to finish our sets. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 5,980 universal copies on the census. That just goes to show that even though this is a book that, I wouldn't necessarily call this a major key, 6,000 is a decent amount of copies to still be sent in for grading because, a lot of people want this, in that slab, they want to have their 9.8 set. 9.9s have 5 on the census, hasn't been a sale since 2021, but you can see that that sold for $6,000. 9.8s, 1,000 on the census, fair market value $240, 30-day moving $226. And, pretty much the journey for this book has been similar to that of a lot of other books in the comic book market, where it shot up in 2021 and 2022, and then, has had its pullback, but probably still selling above that of its 2020 and 2019 prices. And then, of course, when you go down here, you're not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you can see them being sold around that $20, $25, maybe $30 range. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is a very cool one to see back on the list. Of course, a book that had been trending not too long ago, but the one we're talking about is, of course, Bloodstone number 1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 77th slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 2001, written by Abnett and Lanning, and we feature the first appearance of Elsa Bloodstone. Now, if you guys happen to see the Werewolf by Night Halloween special that we got on Disney Plus, it had the debut of Elsa Bloodstone in the MCU. And I actually have to say, outside of Spider-Man number 3, I would say pound for pound, the Werewolf by Night special was probably one of the better things that came out in Phase 4. I mean, it's not necessarily the most mind-blowing, revolutionary, product that we got in the MCU, but for what it was trying to accomplish, what it was trying to do, I thought it did actually a very good job at that. And Elsa Bloodstone was kind of, one of the standout characters from that show. And it does really feel like, they are going to be moving towards the direction of the Midnight Suns, trying to set up the monster universe in Marvel. I think a lot of people are excited about the possibilities possibility of that. And Elsa Bloodstone is a very popular character, very important one for that mythos. And of course, when that show had come out, a lot of people were hopping onto this thing. But like a lot of comic book collectors do, out of sight, out of mind. Now that we are, 6-7 months removed from the debut of that show, it feels like a really good opportunity to buy back into this thing, because we're going to get more Elsa Bloodstone in the future. That's probably one of the reasons why we're starting to see this book move once again. A lot of people are thinking, hey, the prices have come down, the prices are corrected, and I want to hop back into this book that I think is going to do well in the future. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. CGC Census has this at 1,510 universal copies. Not a whole lot, when you consider that it's a modern book that came out in 2001. This is definitely of an era where a lot of these modern books, a lot of people weren't really collecting then. So, it's hard to find these in 9.8 grades. 9.8s have 644 on the census. Fair market value is 475. 30-day moving kind of right in line to that. And you'll see that the graph is similar to that of what we've seen with a lot of books, where it shot up in 2021 and 2022, had its pullback, and now, the price looks pretty juicy overall. If you're somebody who believes in this book for the long term, where it's selling at that $433 range, which again is in that sweet spot, slightly above the 2020 price, but major pullback from where it was selling at the height of $1,200. Then of course, 2001 book, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $100 to $125 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is similar to that of Bloodstone #1 in so much that it is a monster book. But of course, the book we're talking about is Giant Size Chillers #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 38th slot. And that's a pretty big jump if you ask me. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1974, written by Marv Wolfman, that would feature the first appearance of the character known as Lilith. Now, if you happen to know your monster mythology, Lilith, of course, is a very important character. In fact, we're about to get Diablo 4 for all you gamers out there, and Lilith is going to play a major role in that. Anytime you're going to explore demons or vampires or monster stuff, you always got to bring Lilith in there, and that's why a lot of Marvel comic book collectors have been thinking that Giant Size Chillers #1 is going to play an important role in the MCU moving forward. A lot of people are thinking that, when we get to Blade and we start to introduce, the Midnight Suns, we're going to be getting Dracula, we're going to be getting characters like Lilith. So, maybe I should be jumping on this book. On top of that, we actually did get Lilith in the Midnight Suns video game, if you guys happen to play that. I've, in fact, played that game, and it was fantastic. I thought the story was actually really, really good. So Lilith does have a lot of potential if they could just take a story like that and adapt it onto the screen. On top of all that, Giant Size Chillers, Marvel horror, Bronze Age horror. These are very popular books amongst a lot of Marvel collectors, especially being that this is a larger size format. Always hard to get this one in high grade, black cover, the spine is always torn up. So this is always going to be a book that is fairly desirable out there in the market. And a lot of people are thinking that if Lilith comes, this book might get out of reach, and I better get my copy now. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has this at 810 universal copies, so really not too many that are sent in to be slabbed. Although typically this was a book that wasn't really worth, getting graded, because, the value for it was never really that high. Although as, we start to realize, very difficult to get these in the high grades. As you can see, 9.8s only have 27 on the census, and there hasn't even been a sale in quite some time, because these people are actually wanting to hold it. 9.6s, not many either, at 91. Fair market value 875. 30-day moving kind of right around there at the 816 mark. And you can see that this is a book that, yes, did have its speculation boom, shooting all the way up to the $1,800 price point. Now it's had its correction back to the $800 price point. And I would say that that's probably a decent entry point. Maybe there still is a little foam that needs to come off of it, considering that this is a book only selling around that $450 level in August of 2020. But, these 9.6s are really hard to come by. So it's going to be, very competitive, going to be difficult to find this book at that high a grade. And then, of course, down here at the mid grade and the bottom, not going to always see it slabbed, a lot of price compression going on. But typically when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, you can find them being sold around that $60, $75, maybe $100 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that's all I got for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content. I'll see you in the next video.